And we're live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the very first Team Topologies live stream. This is Stream of Teams, and I'm Matthew Skelton, co-author of the book Team Topologies. And I'm super happy to be joined here on the very first episode, episode 0, by my co-author, Manuel Pais. Hi, Manuel. Good to be here again.
Thanks for having me.
That's all right. It was a joint effort, right? So it's the book that we co-authored, Team Topologies, published September 2019. This is just over 5 years ago. So we thought we'd have a bit of a chat about it and reflect on, I guess, what we've learned. Where I suppose also where Team Topologies really arose from. What did we do together before writing the book that led us to write the book, I guess, and what we learned since then, and what we're up to, what's coming up soon. Bunch of these other things. This is a bit experimental to anyone who's watching the stream. This is the very first one, so there may be some hiccups. There may be some things that are not quite as polished as you might expect from a live stream in 2024. But there we are. Just bear with us.
We'll make all the mistakes today, so that next time
we'll make all the mistakes today. Yeah, exactly. Cool. And of course, please add some comments or questions. So you might be on LinkedIn or you might be on YouTube. We get those comments streaming through to us. So hi, Ralph. Hi, Eduardo. There's a comment from Ralph. And here's a comment from Eduardo. Good to see you. Marco, good to see you too. Thanks for joining. So if you want to shout out, just drop us a comment in whichever streaming platform you're on. And we'll take some questions and we'll get some time to pick some of the questions out that are really kind of interesting or spicy, or that maybe relate to some of the things that we're sharing, and we'll do our best to answer that today. Of course, some of the comments we might not have enough time to respond to, but thankfully we now have a Team Topologies community, which is the first thing I just want to share with everyone. If you go to community.teamtopologies.com, then you'll find a really great community. We're adding members more and more quickly. It's based on Mighty Networks, if you're familiar with that. It's a super great platform. Absolutely love it. They've thought about everything. It works really, really well. It's a public community, so almost all the discussions are open to the public. But we're trying to kind of gather a group of people, a worldwide community of people who are really kind of interested in and enthusiastic about Team Topologies and where we're taking it and what could happen next, and so on and so on. So that's now the place to go, basically. If you want more, input, ideas, suggestions, sharing, comments, community around this, head to that place there. Community.teamtopologies.com. We'll get you there, and it's free to join. Have a look around, introduce yourself, and get involved in some of the discussions and comments. And yeah, like I said, some of the comments and questions that come through on the chat in this live stream today, we'll probably end up putting into the community if we don't get time to answer them today. Before we move on then, let's just have a quick look and see if there are actually any comments. Eduardo's put the link in the comments on StreamYard, so thank you. There's people from Germany, Belgium, Scottish Highlands. Peter, hi, good to see you there. Lisbon, Paris, Italy, all over the place. Thank you for joining. Let's have a look. What are we talking about? We are talking about 5 years since Team Topologies. Hopefully we might get a little chance to look at what the next book might include. But you and I, right, Manuel?
Fairly frequent question. What are you going to write about next?
When's it coming out? I mean, it's fair to say we've not actually started writing, have we? But that's not. No. We can be honest about that. So this is relatively early. The publisher is keen to publish it, right? IT Revolution is keen to publish our next book, which is great. That's
and for people who are not familiar with the actual process of publishing a book, can tell you that it's very waterfallish, and it takes about
it's the most waterfall thing in the world, right?
It's like a baby takes 9 months in the best case, and if you miss a deadline, it might be delayed by 1 year. So just to keep things in perspective. But we've had definitely some discussions about what. Obviously, we don't want to just write any book. yes, we could go into different directions based on team topologies, but we're looking, I think it's what is the combination of obviously challenges we see in organizations trying to adopt the ideas from team topologies, but maybe they're missing some important aspects or principles. But it's also where is the industry going, how the new developments influence the way we might organize for fast flow, and then also, at least for me, and I think for you as well, super interesting to see how the same principles and patterns can be applied outside of purely software based services.
Definitely. And clearly, like AI, generative AI and agentic AI is going to be in the mix there, which it wasn't in the mix back in 2018 when you and I were writing the manuscript, and it was published in 2019. That just wasn't a thing really. So that will be part of it. In the same way that kind of cloud was massively disruptive to previous business models, then generative AI and agentic AI is going to be disruptive. But ultimately, it's the same kind of thing. It's helping humans to focus on what's important. And if that means that then some of the details we don't need to worry about, great. Let's empower people to focus on what's actually important in terms of kind of value delivery to users and consumers. Anyway, we may touch a little bit on that later, but I suspect you and I might do a dedicated live stream sort of middle of 2025 sometime, if we got further down the line with what the book looks like. I think that's the more likely.
Yeah, that could be really interesting. Also to get people's input on what they feel is sort of missing.
Yeah. Just before we forget, because we might forget otherwise, we should just mention that you and I will actually be together in person next week. So if you're watching this on the live stream, Manuel and I will actually be in Germany next week, in Cologne, at the Digitale Leute Summit. So if you are in the area and want to attend a workshop run by me and Manuel together, which is actually quite rare because we're not in the same country, I've just put a link in the chat. I think that gets through to all of the different platforms. If you could just go to teamtopologies.com/events, you'll be able to find that this event on there. Search for it on the Team Topologies website. Basically, it's a one-day masterclass, Manuel and I together, focused on expert leadership, how we create nimble, humane organizations with Team Topologies.
And just to be clear, even though Matthew speaks some German, the masterclass will be in English. Otherwise, it would be impossible for me to participate.
Yeah. And of course, if you like the look of that masterclass and think that's like something that you could that you might want to have inside your own organization, then get in touch, because like we can offer that as a private thing as well. So teamtopologies.com/events will get you to the details there, and a whole bunch of other events too. Okay,
maybe just to can mention very briefly, sort of the idea of this masterclass is to start from the principles of fast flow, and from there, yes, we'll get to the sort of patterns and ideas in team topologies, but we start from looking at the principles and what does this mean for an organization trying to achieve fast flow.
And that's a really important point, right? Because Team Topologies, as you know, right, it's not just a thing we invented. This is something that you and I were working on for many, many years prior to writing the book. I think it's worth going back in time effectively now. So going back not just to 5 years when the book was published, but 5 years, 15 years before that, and look at the influences that are behind the Team Topologies book. It's worth having a look at the DevOps topology's origin. That's probably a good place to start. So, like way back in 2013, I was working in an organization in London and saw kind of lots of interesting different opportunities for teams working together. But then there was kind of confusion about which of these options they should pick. And so I wrote a blog post, which then went kind of viral. And then I gave a talk at QCon 2015 in London, right? And you were there
Yes.
because you were working for QCon at the time. So we met in a tiny little room off to the side. I think you interviewed me in like the smallest room in the
Yes.
building. Really, almost like a shoebox, basically, like tiny little room. I remember it still.
Yeah, and I was off camera, and like camera was straight in your face.
Exactly.
And that was
all good.
our first interaction.
But then we ended up doing some work together, quite a lot of work together, right? So we did some work for customers in Leeds, for a law firm, a legal services firm that was UK wide, global, but they had offices in Leeds where I'm based here. Who else? There are several companies, right?
Yes, a large, well-known manufacturer that obviously investing a lot in IoT at the time and cloud together with embedded devices, which was super interesting. And
in fact, that work that we did with that manufacturer with the kind of cloud connected devices ended up kind of influencing a significant chunk of the thinking in the book. There's a figure in the Team Topologies book, figure 8.1. I know this not because I've learned them all, because I pointed someone to it yesterday. Figure 8.1 in chapter 8 is talking about different options for thinking about how you do kind of how you deal with the kind of cognitive load and flow and this kind of thing in that world where you've got hardware, firmware, software, cloud, a bunch of other things all interacting. Like where do you create your platform? Where do you decide to kind of focus attention? And I think there's still a lot of stuff to explore in that space. But anyway, I guess the point being that you and I and the people that we were working with at the time did a lot of work in this space, like deployment pipelines, what's your platform, what's the infrastructure you're working on, a whole bunch of this kind of stuff that really influence the language and how we're thinking about things like flow and cognitive load and so on that is at the heart of the Team Topologies ideas.
Yeah, and I think that case study in the book also highlights to me the fact that Team Topologies is not about, hey, let's use this to define our ideal operating model and then we're done, right? I think that's a misconception or misunderstanding of, and that case study shows that yes, since we need to make trade-off decisions all the time, and having clear team types and interactions helps us understand better the trade-offs. In that example where we needed a team that was more focused on the embedded software part, another team focused on the cloud reporting analytics. For cognitive load reasons, it made sense that they were separate teams, but you would have expected a fair amount of collaboration, at least for an initial period of time. And so, whereas if you take a very linear interpretation of team topology, you'd say, well, there shouldn't be so much collaboration. But in that case, that was the best trade-off. And I think one of the misunderstandings of team topology is that it's going to be something that we implement in a few weeks or months, and then everything is going to be much better, when it actually needs to be a continuous evolution and a continuous learning sort of journey.
It's a continuous learning journey and continuous evolution, partly because the technology is changing so much. I think this is the key point. Like, we're expecting to continue to adopt and use and change and replace, particularly digital technologies, but other technologies too, potentially. But digitally kind of digitally infused or digitally enhanced approaches all the time, because that's where we get a huge amount of benefit and improved sensor data or improved ability to input data or whatever it is. Like this is huge benefits from using digital in these kind of ways, or using Gen AI to create new ideas or to synthesize new possibilities. All this stuff is like really useful, right? But it's changing very rapidly and changing increasingly rapidly. So we're moving towards a position where we're not expecting to install a 3 or 5 year operating model. We're expecting to adopt ways of working that enable us to shift all the time. And yeah, as you said, that's the example 8.1, the figure 8.1 in the book is a really good example of that, where the technology was changing all the time, and it was difficult to immediately see where to put the different boundaries. But that's the reality, really, for all organizations. The technology and the trading environment and the regulations and everything else is changing so much and so quickly that we need to build that muscle to be continuously adaptive. And that's ultimately what we wanted, isn't it? With the language around interaction modes and so on and so on.
Yep.
I thought we could just have a little look about this team DevOps Topologies. This is what my 2015 QCon talk was based on, where we met. And you interviewed me. I think you published like 2 or 3 articles in InfoQ based on these early patterns. I basically asked the question, like, what team structure is right for DevOps to flourish? Now, at the time, back in 2013, DevOps meant how development and operations work really closely together. It means like something else now, but that's what it meant at the time. And so you and I worked on this particular version of that, right? But this is the kind of early thinking. There's some bad ways of doing it, like separate development and operations teams completely not talking to each other, and a bunch of other different patterns that don't really work for various reasons. And then some options that can work really well, like development operations, like collaborating on something. It could be like a new approach to logging, or it could be some metrics, or it could be, doesn't matter, something. They could work closely on one particular area. Maybe we blend all the responsibilities together completely. Or maybe we separate out the responsibilities so that what used to be called operations is now providing stuff from a platform. So this is stuff that you and I worked on, plus our colleagues, 2013. This is, what's that? 6 years before publication of Team Topologies book. So we were living and breathing this stuff all the time, right, for those years prior to the publication. I think it's fair to say that these patterns are kind of were influential, but they're quite sort of static. They don't really think about the evolution very much, and the way that we talk about these patterns in a team topologies perspective is not just focused on development operations. It's focused more generally on flow of value out of, towards the value consumer, towards the customer. But this is where it's coming from: actual real work with real customers, solving real problems for multiple years prior to us sitting down and writing it. We didn't just pull it out of the air, did we?
Yeah, I think that's why the actual writing part was not that painful, as other authors sometimes mentioned, because we had already so many discussions beforehand. It was sort of kind of clear what we wanted to write, and then it was more get it out on paper.
Well, in the end, we ended up writing 85,000 words, right? And then the editors said, sorry guys, we can only accept 55,000 words effectively, because of how there are lots of diagrams and blah blah blah. And turns out in book publishing, people have an expected price they're going to pay for a certain thickness of book, and so basically there's lots of constraints, and you end up having to like shrink down the amount of stuff that you're writing to fit into that magic sweet spot.
And
so
we ended up, I think,
30,000 words.
Yeah. Although there's obviously, we believe, valuable content in there, it also ended up being a good sort of a useful constraint for us to really, what we need to make, prioritize and make good choices about what's going to be in the book. And it forced us to some parts of the book to make them more concise, to make them more clear. Other parts of the book, we really had to say, well, we if we really need to cut, then this is the thing that needs to be left out. So I think it made the book better, but at the same time,
I remember
some
a really
useful
funny
stuff
thing, right?
was out.
You've been doing editorial work for InfoQ for years, right? Like 5 or 6 years or something.
Yeah, something like that.
You've got your editor's scissors like ready all the time, like snip, 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 like chopping the word, chopping out the phrases for in other people's articles. I'd done a little bit of editing prior to that, and I was writing a lot at the time. But then when it came for you and I to do editing on that 85,000 words, I think the editors, like, we actually were quite quick with that. We were pretty brutal, I think, and the editors, amazing editors at IT Revolution, particularly Anna and Leah, they were like, Matthew, Manuel, how can you be so brutal with your own work? We were expecting you to be for it to be really painful, and like we were like, nah, cut this stuff out. I guess we'd had that experience of editing.
Eat your own dog food, I guess, kind of thing.
I thought it would be fun to go through one or two little bits of that 30,000 word that we cut out of the document. So for those people watching the live stream or the video afterwards, Manuel and I actually went through in detail the 30,000 words that we cut out of the manuscript before publication, and we actually we didn't look at it for 5 years. Basically, we looked at it back in June 2024, a few months ago, and we recorded ourselves like going through that for the first time. So we're in the process of pulling together some material around that, and we'll probably release a video or some outtakes or some other,
like,
I don't know what we're going to do
unboxing of 30,000
unboxing. But what we thought we'd do is just like zoom into a few snippets today to give you a taste of what that kind of thing looks like. So this is the actual document. You can see there's a massive pair of scissors in there. This is the document that we actually just dropped that information into, the text that we cut out of the original manuscript. And I'm going to search for one or two things. I'm going to search.
T-Top was the code name for the book at IT Revolution.
Yeah.
By the way,
yeah, T-Top.
T-Top.
And the first thing is all about Conway's Law, and we actually removed quite a nice section actually around the evidence for Conway's Law, which I don't know. Yeah, we had to remove it, right? But it potentially could have been quite useful to have in there. There's definitely some people who are skeptical about some aspects of Conway's Law, so it could have been nice to have that in there. But I think some of this made it into a talk, didn't it? I think. Some of these details down here, looking at the research from,
I think, was early days
design.
Training. Some of the early training had these examples. Which the interesting part is that then it's looking at industries not centered around software and finding similar results or evidence for Conway's Law. I don't know if you have the same perspective. I do find that almost a bit surprisingly for myself, these days, there's a lot of awareness of Conway's Law. And see, at least even organizations
partly due to this
have...
book that came out in 2019, right? Some of these two guys published a book in 2019 that talked about Conway's Law. They might have had something to do with it,
But for example, I don't see a lot of awareness, for example, another topic in the book, which is the trust boundaries, right? And the work of Robin Dunbar. I find that is an area where still there's not much attention paid to that. But Conway's Law, it tends to be present. Even organizations that just realize at least that we are fighting Conway's Law. And that's why some of these things are so difficult.
Yeah. I think we might end up extracting this bit here about the evidence for Conway's Law. That probably writes itself as an article, to be honest.
And it would be interesting to see if there have been new research or articles that in other industries, perhaps.
Because I think the most recent research that we were going to include in the book was from 2012. I think that's the most, or maybe 2014? No, 2012, I think was the most recent one. So when we were writing it, 2018, it wasn't that far away. It was only 6 years afterwards. But like now, another 5 years later, like it could be nice to see if there's any more research done. Anyway, that was the first one. What else are we looking at? Right, here we go. There was a section that was on like engineering practices or like discipline for effective software delivery at speed. And this is we're a bit sad to take this out, weren't we?
I think we were expecting to write, even sort of expand on this. At least that's what I remember, that we wanted to expand on how continuous delivery and DevOps and operability were influencing team topologies in a way, and how those were some where we got some of the principles for team topologies. But then once we realized the restrictions and the length of the book, we sort of didn't go further there.
Because at the time, you and I were heavily into like continuous delivery, and I was quite strongly. I mean, you as well, but I was particularly strongly into operability as a lens to use it, trying to solve some challenges.
Maybe some of the people watching might be aware that we were, even before we thought about writing team topology, we're working on this team guides, right, for operability, releasability, testability. I did some of the editing work on the testability guide, which came out from Rob Meany and Ash, that had some really good stuff. So we were focused on that a lot.
And of course, a lot of this focus on things like continuous delivery. I mean, this then the practice of continuous delivery appears in the state of DevOps reports, like the use of continuous delivery is a predictor of higher organizational performance. And a lot of this focus on things like operability then it sort of became popularized in SRE from Google, and more recently in kind of platform engineering and things. So like it's not gone away. It's just I suppose it's worthwhile emphasizing the core disciplines that actually are needed to make fast flow work. You can't just restructure the organization and expect stuff to happen. You've got to have the engineering discipline. You've got to invest in high quality approaches to working with code, effectively working with systems to make that stuff work. It's not just about pushing stuff out the door really quickly without any quality. Let's have a look at some questions. Let's have a look in here. Sebastian, insightful. Let's just put this on the screen. So insightful, considering some of the most influential literature at the time you were working on DevOps topologies was already flow-centered, thinking about Phoenix, Unicorn projects, and stuff. Absolutely. Like when we talk about fast flow in Team Topologies, it's there on the front cover, right? Organizing business and technology teams for fast flow. Some people misinterpret flow as just being pushing things out the door. It's absolutely not that. This is the third way of DevOps, where we've got feedback loops coming back from production back into the teams building it. We want a really tight feedback, as tight a feedback loop as possible. The fast flow, we get ourselves into a situation that we can have a fast flow of changes or fast flow of value precisely because that's how we're most adaptive. We're able to get stuff into production, listen to what's happening, bring that back into the team to give them the insights that they need to be able to do the next thing or to be able to adjust. It's not just about like pushing features out of the door, but there definitely some folks have kind of misinterpreted it for some reason. Maybe that's a physical manufacturing flow thing where some people have this idea that manufacturing is about kind of throughput and output, the widgets, but that's not the kind of flow that we're really talking about. It's very much flow in order to be able to be nimble, adaptive, and sense what needs to change.
Because it's flow of value, right? To determine what is valuable, you need to observe if you're getting the expected outcomes, whatever that might be. You want to change user behavior, or you want them to be able to do certain tasks faster. Can be any number of things that you're looking as outcomes, but we're not going to know if we achieve the value until we get the feedback loop back into the teams. And I think that's what gets confused with the fast flow of features or whatever you want to, changes that pushing them out the door, which is just one of those three kind of principles from Phoenix project as well, which was to me a major influence. I think that was probably my biggest fan moment, was interviewing Jin Kim and then meeting him at the Enterprise, one of the early editions of the Enterprise Summit, DevOps Enterprise Summit, and then going back from the Phoenix project to the goal, which is obviously the source of inspiration for the Phoenix project. So
Yep.
our work is definitely influenced by all of that.
Yeah, it needs to be about an expectation that we course correct, that we start with an expectation that we don't know what's actually needed, so we get fast flow to get it into the hands of users, and then we detect whether that's actually useful or not, and then we can sense and adjust. It's not just pushing sausages out of the door or widgets. There's some interesting comments that are coming through, but I'll just leave those for a second or two, because they're more relevant after we've done a tiny bit more. There was a couple of extra things that were quite interesting to look at. There was something about looking at existing team types. Where is it?
Yeah, I think that was a difficult decision.
So what we're doing, just talk us through what we were doing here. What was the intention of this kind of grid and this way of looking at things?
We were essentially looking at the time, so 2018, what kind of teams were usually referenced in the industry, and so you see their architecture team, cloud team, a component team, or a feature team, and how this would sort of map to the four types of teams in Team Topologies. So this was both internally, so between the two of us discussing. It's almost like validating Team Topologies by looking at what exists today. How would this make sense in a Team Topologies approach? For example, the architecture team typically would expect to become more of an enabling team. And we thought this is helpful for organizations to sort of then move towards Team Topologies. But at the same time, at least this is my how I remember it, there was a sort of a danger of then taking this and just sort of do a relabeling and say, well, this team was component team, now they're a complicated subsystem team. This team was infrastructure, now they are a platform team, and not really changing the purpose and the way those teams work.
I mean, that happens anyway now, right? You've seen this, like people just looking at Team Topologies going, "Oh, we'll just relabel our existing teams and then we're done," which is a real shame, because the value is in shifting behavior and shifting ways of working to enable flow and to reduce cognitive load and to accelerate innovation. That's ultimately what we should be focused on, and where the power of Team Topologies comes in. Just relabeling some teams and saying you're done isn't going to give the outcomes that the organizations think it might.
And I think although this could have been helpful for some organizations that kind of get the ideas of fast flow and focus on user needs, it was also kind of dangerous if you just take it at face value, sort of speak. You need to understand, to start with, okay, what are we trying to deliver? Who are the users? What are the user needs? Exactly. What do we need to have internally, so that the teams focusing on the end user can do their work in an efficient way, using internal platforms or being enabled, etc. So I thought this approach, this mapping, might not allow people to then really think about the more fundamental aspects.
I think there's potentially a version. There's a version of a way of presenting this kind of information, this mapping of existing types of team into Team Topologies type teams. There's a way of presenting this information which is not in a table form. Like it needs more explanation, it needs more patterns, it
to
particularly
be
needs to
more
show
contextual.
transition and more contextual. It needs to show the skills that we're expecting. It needs to show the feeling, even the emotion, what it feels like to go from a UX dedicated UX team to something else, or going from a feature team to something else. It's more Team Topologies centric. Like there's going to be a feeling that's different in each of these situations too. There's actually a great question here from Drees. Thanks, Drees. In your opinion, is fast flow a consequence of doing things right or a goal in and of itself? I know what I think. What do you think?
It's like almost philosophical question, right? Because at the end of the day, you need fast flow if you want to deliver value at fast pace, value to your customers, to your organization. I think it is helpful to think of fast flow as a goal, even though it's more of a capability of the organization. But it needs to be present enough. We need to be focused on fast flow because that's going to enable then actual delivery of value to customers safely and rapidly, as we say, right?
Yeah.
So that's just kind of, although fast flow in itself, of course, I think if you misinterpret flow, like we said earlier, as how fast can I get things out the door, you could get to fast flow and not be really providing value. So it's worth to have it as a goal if you really understand what we mean by flow.
If it's fast flow value and we're validating what we're doing, and the customers are actually getting, users are actually getting value out of this stuff, then it's sort of a yes. It's almost like the difference between. So if the goal is to run a marathon, then we need to be doing regular exercise. We need to be fit. We need to be, we've got to have good core strength. We've got to have good muscle strength. We've got to be looking after our body and eating well. We've got to keep ourselves in shape and fast flow all the disciplines. So like, is fast flow a consequence of doing things right? So let's say we're doing all those good things like diet, exercise, the right kind of, looking after this body to be able to run a marathon. Like doing those things is not the end in itself. The end is to run a marathon in a good time or finish the marathon or whatever. But like those daily things are so important that you've got to have a very strong focus on it, like you said. I think it's something also, like that. Like they're so important, even if the goal itself is like kind of beyond that. We can't just pretend that they're not important. We have to invest a lot of time and effort and things to keep things at that level of intensity or quality, and then we get that really good outcome, which is in organizations is fast flow, customer value, business agility, adaptability, and so on.
Yeah, and if you have all those practices in place, then you can also have more flexibility to make choices, right? Do I want to
exactly
run the marathon? I can because I'm fit and I have the sort of agility and ability to do that. But if I see that actually that's not what's best for the business, I can go and do something else, right?
Exactly, and because we've still got that business, so we've still got that capability of fast flow and all the practices around it, then we can adjust and we can focus on something different or something related, something adjacent. Maybe there's an opportunity over here that we can now address because we've got that organizational muscle, we've got that organizational capability of doing these things with good quality, with the right kind of intent in mind. Like, what's the purpose of releasing this feature today? Well, we're going to release the smallest thing that gives us some feedback about whether the user actually wants it. Okay, that's the way that we work. We don't just plan some great big thing and hope it's going to be the right thing that people want to buy. That level of discipline and like the equivalent of that core agility, I suppose, that core strength for running a marathon. That's the massively valuable thing inside the organization. It's not actually, it's not just getting things out of the door. It's not. It's there for a purpose. It's meeting a set of customer or user needs on an ongoing basis.
Yep.
Okay, a great question from Dries. Thank you very much. Let's have a look. Another question here from Eduardo. Did you have something on grouping of fundamental team topologies, team types? It's something we've started getting into more over the last few years. So in the Team Topologies book, there is some detail about groupings, particularly where we talk about a platform and the fact that a platform is like a fractal. Like you can zoom into a platform and you can see Stream-aligned teams and other platforms and a bunch of other different types of team. I don't think in this document here we talked about groupings of stream-aligned teams. I don't think we did.
No, I don't think so.
Look. I don't think we did. I'll search for it now, but I don't think grouping. Teams. Let's just have a little. I'll put it on the screen now. Groupings. There's the word groupings. Use team of teams groupings. Yeah, we mentioned it, but it's not a big part of it. Temporary groupings of people. Use family. Oh, here we go. Use families of related teams for large programs of work. So that got cut. So yeah, it's interesting. Talk a little bit about the folks from less large scale Scrum find some aspects of Team Topologies very difficult. I think it's partly because they see the ownership or the stewardship boundaries are too small. So it might be interesting to kind of look at this part here and explore that a little bit more and revisit that, particularly in the context of like groupings of teams that work on similar things. That could be an interesting thing for us to look at.
Yeah.
In the coming months. There's two more things I think which are really interesting. I just want to have a quick look at these. Which is what you might call like a disaggregated model of organization design, basically where there's obviously in the industry there's often a lot of talk about like centralization versus decentralization, and which kind of misses the point. We need something centralized and something's decentralized. And trying to centralize everything is not effective. Trying to decentralize everything is not effective. And it's looking at things through a different lens. And I think Team Topologies does provide this lens to get out of this trap of centralization versus decentralization.
Yeah.
Don Ronitson here talking about decentralized execution supported by centralized coordination. I mean, that's effectively what Team Topologies ends up with platforms and enabling teams and streamlined teams and so on. Right?
Yeah, I that's something I still hear from companies on a regular basis. Is not just that it's neither fully decentralized or fully centralized. It's also the cost of shifting between these two, like in regular cycles. That's what I've heard from some companies. We used to have everything centralized. We moved to everything decentralized, and we pushed a lot more of the decisions into the product or streamlined teams. And now we're seeing the drawback of that, and we're going back to centralizing a lot of stuff. And it's like you never stop to figure out what's the right balance. I think that's the most painful thing.
And for me, it's not even a halfway balance. Is the point? It's not that you just have to go halfway between and accept the worst part of both. It's like a very different way of even looking at this whole challenge, which I think is lots of organizations don't get.
Yeah,
I think there's some opportunity there to dive into this part a lot more and to address this centralization decentralization kind of pendulum swing by bringing to the surface how the Team Topologies patterns actually help address that. And related patterns. Yep. It's not. I guess it's not just Team Topology. It's other disciplines that go alongside Team Topologies with this expectation that we need to help to accelerate innovation. We don't want to have 73 teams out of 100 all discovering how to implement agentic AI or ChatGPT. Like, there needs to be some degree of sort of coordination or learning from each other at scale, so that we're not just like massively duplicating effort all the time. But at the same time, we would never want to centralize that discovery of using AI into a single team. That makes absolutely no sense.
Yeah.
So like,
And it
some
also
patterns in
connects
this space I think are
to
useful.
things like wordly mapping, which was also,
Yeah,
we had a bit that was cut as well, where understanding the landscape of what you're building, or kind of the things you think are valuable to your customers, and then figuring out, is this in a very innovation stage, pioneer stage, where we're going to need, and we should expect more discovery, which to some people means less efficiency, but that should be okay. That, yes, we're going to waste some effort because we've went in one direction that turns out is not helpful, and that has to be expected, because the expected return, if we get this innovation right, is much bigger. So we make
exactly.
those trade-offs. But if you, at that stage, you're trying to do everything through very centralized services, and anything you need to do that is newish or novelty, or use some new AI tooling or whatever, you need to go through a lengthy approval process, and it has to have all this centralized controls in place. Then you're never going to be innovative, really. When you get
Exactly.
there, it's going to be too late.
Exactly. And it's nice that other people have actually picked up on the connection between Team Topologies and wordly mapping. In particular, our friend and colleague Suzanne Kaiser, she's got a book coming out at some point soon, Adaptive Systems with Domain-Driven Design, Wordly Mapping, and Team Topologies. And this is effectively architectures for flow, and a way of navigating this whole space. Like, what do we build? When do we build it? When do we stop building something that we started a few years ago, because actually it's now available as a cloud service? And navigate, like, I was literally like on a workshop with a customer a few weeks ago, where like 10 years ago they had started to build a globally distributed like data store, I think using Cassandra or something. 10 years ago it's the right thing to do. You wouldn't start doing it today though. So like, they've got this legacy thing. Effectively, they're spending cognitive load and effort like managing this infrastructure, which, to be honest, they could just get from Amazon or Google or Microsoft or whatever. And so navigating that whole the need to expect to replace technology that you've built internally and to get rid of it effectively, because it's actually weighing down. And her book and Suzanne's talks and workshops and things really help with like navigating that and connecting it together to things like wordly mapping, to help us have those more strategic insights into
Yeah.
where to focus effort and activity. I think it's so good to see it come through.
I've also, as an anecdote, I've had a customer, and they're working on a internal platform, and they're like, yes, we already have this service that works just like PagerDuty. And okay, so why are you not using PagerDuty instead of maintaining and having people dedicated to this thing, which is basically a commodity that exists, and probably usually it's going to work better if you use the commodity, the industry offering.
Yep.
Anyway,
There's an interesting question here. I think I'll just signpost this one. So, a question from Dominic: how about looking at possible uses outside of the IT team? So this is something I pulled together. How do I reply to this? I don't know how I replied to that exactly. But I gave a talk at FastFlow Conference 2023, so May 2023, exactly about the use of Team Topologies outside of IT. I'll just put the link in the chat. And I'll share my screen as well. So the video is online and so on, but like there's some interesting examples of organizations like really actually using the ideas well outside of IT. So one particular person who's in charge of part of the UK National Health Service, she was like, let's bring Team Topologies to the whole of the National Health Service. This is someone who's a doctor, effectively, GP, but that seeing the value in the patterns, in the language, in thinking about cognitive load. In her case, she's thinking about patient care, like patient outcomes. So the fact that Team Topologies can be used for helping to improve patient outcomes is kind of a pretty cool thing from my perspective. And and this is people who are just doing this, like they're not necessarily coming to us for advice. They're just seeing the patterns and going ahead and trying them out.
And then it's interesting, this year at Fast Flow Conference, I presented about how to apply the ideas of internal platforms outside of engineering or IT, where also present some examples from actual companies where they take the idea of how do we help our internal users and reduce their cognitive load to domains where you would not usually think about it as a platform. For example, leadership, right? We actually
what's your speaker deck handle on here? I can't remember what it is.
Good question, because I'm always I should be able to find.
Let me see if I can. Manuel Pais.
It might be MF.
I think it's this one here. Is this the right one? This is your account, anyway. Let's see if I can find.
Give me 1 second.
This is it. This is the deck here. Beyond Engineering.
Yes.
Using platforms outside of IT, effectively. So I'll just drop that. That in the chat as well.
So the example for around leadership as a platform is really interesting. It's based on company in Norway called Capra Consulting, and we're actually going to publish their case study soon on teamtopologies.com.
So in the case of leadership as a platform, this is it's a little bit like servant leadership, right? But leaders seeing themselves as kind of providing services out to the rest of the organization, which almost inverts the normal mental model.
Helping the streamlined teams make better decisions, therefore also being more autonomous, but better decisions that are aligned to the strategy and to the business goals and metrics and all these things. So super interesting.
Okay. We are coming towards the end. There's some amazing questions in here. There's a great question from Pavlo, for example, which we're not going to answer today, but what was the most on the edge or spicy idea that you've considered adding to the framework but did not do so for some reason? I love the question. Let's chat more in the community. So Team Topologies community, let's chat more about that in there, because that's at least an hour's worth of discussion just by itself, I think. But it's a super question. Thank you. And what else have we got in here? Something from Torsten here about development value streams rather than operational value streams. Again, that's a big topic, but let's try and move that into the community. That would be great, because it's an important one, particularly as it relates to cognitive load and so on and so on. Another great question coming from Ruben. How do we measure the adoption and understanding of Team Topologies by the C-suite and the leadership level? It may require a shift in culture and strategy. Love it. We're at the point where we actually need to be thinking about exactly those kind of things. Particularly if we're doing this leadership as a platform, like Manuel was talking about in Fast Flow Conference in 2024, that then becomes important. And it's actually amazing to see and it's a big shout out to everyone who's been involved, practitioners and enthusiasts and advocates being involved in helping to make the Team Topologies ideas appealing and relevant to people at a leadership level. That's where we are in 5 years. It's had a big impact. I don't have the answers, Manuel. I don't know about you. I don't have the answers readily, but we can start to explore them.
It's definitely an area that needs to be further explored. It reminds me an interesting case study we have published about Telenet, which is one of the main telecom operators in Belgium. So that's on our website on teamtopologies.com. where you can, even though they don't explicitly mention that, but you can see there is adoption and understanding of TT by the C-level. Otherwise, the kind of changes that are described there, organizational wide changes towards fast flow, wouldn't be possible without that kind of adoption at that level. But yes, we are working on this as well, right?
Yep. Cool. So
we had a few announcements to make.
I think a couple of announcements. What else have we got? Let's have a look. So thanks to everyone for joining the stream and for watching it if you're watching it later on. Just a few things to signpost. First thing, Team Topologies Academy. Go to academy.teamtopologies.com. That's run by you, isn't it? That's your baby.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, a couple of things that. Go ahead. Did you want to?
How many people? How many people have been learning on there? How many different? Approximately how many people have signed up for the academy now?
I don't have the latest numbers, but we're talking about thousands of students, people who have signed up both individually or as part of a group for that the company decided to train a group of people. I don't remember if it was around 5,000 students, maybe. So that's pretty cool. The academy has been around for about 3 years. It feels longer than that, but it's probably been 3 years. And yeah, we're still focusing on what's the other content that would be useful. At the moment, obviously, it's very centered around team topologies, different types of teams. How do we identify independent value streams, things like this. But I did want to mention a couple of things. We are launching the Portuguese and Spanish version of the Academy, meaning that all the website will be available in these languages, as well as all the content is going to have captions curated in those two languages, which turns out one of them is my mother tongue, Portuguese, and the other is Spanish. I live in Spain for several years, but that's not the reason why we chose them. It's because there's a lot of market and people asking for translations of the content into those two languages. And the other quick announcement is we have a winter sale going on, 15% off on all the content. The end of the year is usually a time when people are looking to do some learning. There's usually some training budget left, so this might be interesting to consider expanding your awareness around team topologies.
That is great, thank you. I want to also just quickly highlight we've got our events. Go to teamtopologies.com/events. There's a whole load of things happening in that space now. Lots and lots of stuff happening all the way around the world, different languages and so on. So if you're interested to take a look, and crucially, of course, stay involved via the Team Topologies community. Community.teamtopologies.com will get you there. Thanks for watching, either live or later afterwards. And Manuel, it's been great to chat. I'm looking forward to what we do next. There's a lot more that you and I want to do, and it's nice to reconnect with the kind of origins of what we were doing back then.
Yeah, it's great to see the questions are very connected to the things we are discussing ourselves. We don't have all the answers, but we have similar focus on what we're trying to help with next, basically.
Exactly. Like the mission is to make organizations more effective and more humane via the Team Topologies ideas, and we're laser focused on that. Super. Thank you so much, Manuel. Appreciated.
Thank you.
And thank you to everyone for joining, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.